And then in terms of stakeholders, you've got different, again, stakeholders that are important in the context of how you would do the prioritization. First off is basically the customers, the users, the business, all of them really come into picture. The end users, again, very important, because what we're trying to develop is a product, a process, or an initiative which is aimed to address the needs, the opportunities, the problems of either the customers or users. So it's important that we understand their position there from their point of view, and then come up. And obviously implementation subject matter expert, we're talking now about the solution here, right? So we're looking at, okay, we understood the initial, the as is situation. We're now trying to come up with how we can address the problems and go slowly into the solution space, into the implementation level. And that's where we're talking about the implementation SMEs, the technical architect, the solution architects, and so on and so forth. Project manager, again, is very important, because we can then have a better buy-in, better reach out to the right set of people. Regulators, as we discussed, the bodies and the organizations which stipulate, which kind of give you the regulation and the compliance of your product with their guidelines and directives. And the sponsors obviously would be, sometimes the sponsor would actually say, I need this, but then there needs to be a really good rationale and a reasoning out with the sponsors as to, sometimes it could be their whims and fancies. So it's not really practical or not really usable by the customers and users, or potentially doesn't have a business value as well. But just because a sponsor, because he's got the money, he gave you the money to start the project, he's got a 50 million pound budget for this, and he or she is a sponsor for this project, if they've got their say, we need to really be able to kind of either convince them or do some other piece of fooljiggery, as I say, and then we'll need to come up with a way to impress upon them that their idea is good, but it's not something that we can work on now. Maybe we can work on it later, which in effect, it's dropped. But we need to be political with them. So that's important again. So that's the kind of set we have really got in this context of the stakeholders. And what techniques you would have in the prioritization. We need to have a backlog management. We were talking about backlog grooming and backlog refining in the context of agile methodologies, right? The Scrum. So we've got the product backlog, which is the responsibility and the ownership of the product owner as per Scrum. So the product owner would be maintaining all the requirements, the tasks, the features, defects, and technical tasks, all of them into the backlog, and then they would do the prioritization, that's what we call technically as grooming of the backlog or refining of the backlog. And then once we have the lower level, always stays in the bottom, the lower level items, high overview items, things which are not explained further, which are not elaborated, and big ticket items would always stay at the bottom. And then as you go up, you've got the items which are fine-grained, which are fully elaborated, for which you have got stories. Each story has got description, estimates, and then perhaps even the prioritization. So all of them move up. So the ones that are in the top perhaps would become the must-haves, the important and urgent ones, and that get into the sprint backlog, potentially sprint backlog, based on obviously the team's acceptance. So that's the backlog management, very important. Business cases are potentially what drive the whole project forward, right? Unless you create a business case and then you have a buy-in from the stakeholder, you need to really, again, business case is not just done initially in the project, but sometimes you need to maintain and keep updating the business case as and when you go through the project life cycle or the product development life cycle. So you need to constantly go back, understand what are the costs involved, what are the benefits that you're accruing or getting from this, what's the value of all the work that you're doing, and is it justifying, how is it justifying the creation of this product or the improvement of the process, or to re-engineer the whole process. So business case, very important, not just to be created, but also to be updated regularly and periodically. A decision analysis in terms of, again, go or no-go decision, right? So it's not easy sometimes. You need to have those multiple tiers of different way of organizing the business, the technology, the infrastructure, operations, marketing, customer, so many layers of or so many different lenses of strategy that you need to address, that you need to look through to be able to take a decision. So I mean, that's what I think. It's a model called strategy lens, and I think we can use either that, or we can use different types of decision making approaches. Whatever again is comfortable and convenient for you, you can deploy that and again take a decision, go or no go. Financial analysis, again, very important. We're talking about a business case just a few minutes ago. The business case again has got a financial bearing in terms of the cost, what are the benefits, and finally, is it going to help us in the long run? What's the return on investment? If I'm going to invest a few $1 million or a few billion pounds here, what is going to be the impact in a few years, in 2 years, 3 years down the line? How much am I going to get back? What's the kind of return on that investment? How is it going to be, right? What's the payback? So some of these techniques like discounted cash flows, payback periods, and net cash flows and things like that, as well as the return on investment. All of these are some of the techniques that we can deploy to understand the impact of what requirement is going to be prioritized. Again, interviews are a good tool here to be able to understand from the context of the business or the senior management what they think is more important, more urgent, that would again get the priority. So they're a good tool. And then item tracking, which again is part of the backlog management in terms of making an item. Then that item could be, again, as we discussed, it could be a requirement, it could be a defect, it could be a task, it could be a technical task, it could be, for instance, a change request that came through from a customer or a senior stakeholder. All of those are basically items, and they all go into the backlog, and then we kind of track them as to how, again, traceability of requirements come in, how that requirement has been affected into the product in terms of the architecture, the design, development and testing, and all the way back through. So that's a very important technique as well. And we discussed the risk and analysis and management, very important again in this context, because to be able to define or decide on the requirement. Sorry,
which technique is very important?
The risk analysis and management.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because each requirement, you've got a requirement, and then you need to understand the impact, potential impact of that requirement on the of implementing the requirement on the final product. It could potentially carry its own risks associated with the implementation. It could be that you don't have the technologies, for example. The requirement could be, I need to, as we discussed, I need to have a centralized repository of the customers in one place, for which I might use a CRM product, a customer relationship management product. So that's all good. But then the point is, if you want to build that into the product suite of your technologies now, you might not have the technology to do that. You may not have the resources with the right skill set to do that, right? So how does that fit in the overall context? What are the options that you have? What risks do those options carry? If you want to buy, what is the risk? If you want to build that, what is the risk? What is the technology risk? What is the market risk? What's the business risk? Your business perhaps is totally unrelated to what you are trying to build or buy. It's a technical job, whereas the business is not technology related. It's the core business is potentially something like insurance or banking, where they say that we're not technology company. We're banking. We're into banking. We're into manufacturing. The core domain or core purpose of a business is completely different, right? So what is the business risk involved in buying that software or in building that software? All those things need to be again addressed, and the mitigation strategy need to be looked at. Estimation, very important. We discussed this already, in terms of the sizing. For every item that you can kind of track and put in the backlog, it's important that it needs to have an estimate done in terms of the size. And from the size, we said that we would have, using the productivity and the size, we can come up with the effort required. From the effort, using the resources, we can come with a schedule. From the schedule and the resources, we come with the final cost in terms of the cost estimate that it would be. So you see that from the size, what is basically, is it small, is it medium, is it large, or is it extra large, or whatever it is, the relative sizing. We then arrive at, once we understand the size of that particular requirement, relative terms, small for me could be different from small for you. So that's fine. But at least within my own team, I can have a uniform understanding of what small means, and what amount of effort does the small sized requirement take in. So it could take, let's say, 3% days. And then my team has got, let's say, 3 developers. That means that if I put all 3 developers onto this particular task of 3% days, potentially that could be done in how many days? 1 day, right? So that is a schedule. I can do it in 1 day. So this particular task of 3% days, or a medium task of 3, would be taking 3% days, which in effect will take 3 people's time, and it takes 1 calendar day, 1 day of 8 hours to complete. And that means that I need to have the cost effectively is that basically the resource cost for that is 3 times 1, right? Three people, and one day they're working each 1 day. So that is 3 times of their availability or their cost or the rate for 1 day, 1% day. And 3 into 1% day would give you 3% days of effort into the cost. And that would result in just for the resource for the person, it would cost so much. Then you talk about the tools, the technologies, the resources, or whatever that is, application that you need to work on that, and then come up with the final cost, right? So that's a way that you would need to estimate for the work. And then the prioritization is again going into the aspect of what exactly is prioritization. That is a technique, right? We talked about planning poker, so that's a technique. Talked about Moscow, which is again a prioritization technique. So there are a lot of different prioritization techniques on their own. So ABC technique in manufacturing is a very tried and tested prioritization in the context of agile planning poker, and the sizing using Fibonacci series. It's all tried and tested and more accepted ways of prioritization techniques now. So, and then the workshops and these kind of group exercises would bring us all into this room and then help us kind of discuss and take a consensus, arrive at a consensus, take a decision about a particular requirement. If there is a conflict, if there is differences and different views in terms of which one needs to be done when, then try and get all the people involved into a room and then have it sorted out, have it up the wall, and then have a discussion, arrive at a quick decision, and then have a go or no go on that requirement. Again, workshops would really be a very handy sort of technique for that. So that's about prioritization of requirements, which again is a very important and very critical aspect of your requirements lifecycle management. Again, it's not done once or twice, it's done all the way through the entire life cycle of the requirement management. So very, very important.